Notorious Chicago mobster Al Capone used to own this historic hotel in Dubuque, Iowa, along the Mississippi River.
This is where Al would have stayed at.
That's at least what written records.
This floor that we're on now is the basement.
And a secret underground tunnel below the Hotel Julien strongly indicate.
Could that have been their getaway location for their getaway cars? No one really knows.
The present-day hotel building first opened its doors in 1915. Made of concrete and steel, the 8-story structure was designed to be fireproof. After all, the previous hotel had burned down only 2 years earlier on that very same piece of land.
So this is from December of 1914.
Dwight Hopfoff is Hotel Julien's general manager. He gave me a behind-the-scenes tour.
So now we're going to take the ride up the 8th floor. This might have been the same elevator that Al Capone rode up and down in with his henchmen.
Born in 1899 in New York City, Capone moved to Chicago in 1919 at the age of 20. Capone, often known by his nickname Scarface, quickly became the boss of the Chicago mob. He ruled for 7 years during the heart of the Prohibition era. Dubuque, Iowa is around 200 miles northwest of Chicago, where Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin meet along the Mississippi River. That jurisdictional and geographical jumble served as a perfect place to hide out when things got hot in the Windy City.
Some of the staff members can remember Al being here and that he would always rent the 8th floor and rented the entire 8th floor of the hotel. And it was believed that was so that he could watch the 2 bridges that came from, one from Wisconsin and one from Illinois. And the talk was that if he ever got concerned that there was rival gangs coming or possibly sheriffs or deputies or something to kind of possibly get him, the story was that he would take the elevator down to the basement of the building and then kind of headed north throughout the basement of the building. And that it was that he had getaway cars stored in an undercar garage across Main Street.
Hopfoff took me down to the hotel basement.
From this point on, this is all new building.
Where in 2007, crews excavated earth to create an underground pool and fitness center.
And then that way would be the way to Main Street.
And they found
some area that had been stoned over. That was an opening that would have gone underneath Main Street.
Suspicious to say the least.
Adds to the lore that the idea was that they had a getaway location for their cars underneath Main Street and across the street.
And before the 2007 renovation, this whole space
was nothing. It was dirt. There was no pool. So this was all new building that they excavated to create to have the pool.
The Miracle Car Wash is located 2 blocks west of Hotel Julien, and it's partially underground. Capone fanatics believe the gangsters' hotel getaway tunnel led right to the car wash's lower level. Standing on the sidewalk, you get a sense of the distance between both buildings. It is worth noting that the car wash did not open until 1960. That was 13 years after Capone died from health complications that included a stroke and pneumonia. But let's be real, most car washes don't start underground, leading people to believe the business built off of infrastructure that was already in place.
This is where Al would have stayed at, with the staff delivering food up to this floor and basically stepping off and handing it to his group.
Hopfoff brought me to the 8th floor, the one Capone loved to take over during the 1920s and early 1930s. In a 1970 interview, one housekeeper, now deceased, recalled that Capone's guards would station themselves at the elevator and stairwells. The housekeeper claimed the guards were always friendly, but never extended an invitation for her to meet Capone.
There are signed documents of staff members that serviced Al's hotel, where they would bring food up to his floor. And so they remember Al being here and bringing food to his henchmen, and they were never allowed to go onto the 8th floor, but there's documents like that support it. He always kind of traveled with like 4 or 5 people, and they became familiar with the faces of those individuals being the same players.
Nowadays, the 8th floor has regular guest rooms with no lasting signs of Capone.
So we're taking the elevator to the 2nd floor, which is where the Al Capone suite is.
In 2009, the Hotel Julien decided to honor its unique Capone connection by creating a suite bearing the mobster's name. the hotel designed the 2-bedroom, 2.5-bathroom suite with the vision of old Hollywood glamour.
Little picture of Al behind you.
After walking through 2 sets of double doors, you enter the main entertaining space. There's a full kitchen, 8-person dining room table, and a living area. Though 60 feet or so below the 8th floor, guests can still pretend to be Capone, keeping an eye on the traffic streaming across the bridges that span the Mississippi River.
This one obviously is it's repurposed. It was actually
This walk-in safe is perhaps the most treasured item in the Capone suite.
Older hotels, or old ones like this one is 100 plus years old, they often had safes in them because all the transactions were all via cash. There wasn't credit cards in that regard. So the owners of the hotel or the managers of the hotel often at the end of the night would take the cash sales up to their room, lock it up, and the next morning they would take it downstairs. So that's how the safes in these older buildings were pretty common.
I asked Hopfoff what's the most convincing piece of evidence that Capone not only stayed at the Hotel Julien, but also owned the luxury inn.
There was a postcard that shows 3 hotel logos, of which 2 of them definitively were Al's hotels in Chicago. Unfortunately, those are demolished, but there's a postcard that I've seen myself that shows 3 hotel logos on it. And 2 of the hotels are the hotels in Chicago, and the other one is, at that time, might have been the Julien, because the hotel has gone through some name changes. So it adds a little bit to the lore that Al was associated with these other 2 hotels, and that this might have been the 3rd one he was involved in.
In fact, one Hotel Julien employee claimed to have once seen Capone looking through the property's financial books. What's more, in 1927, Hotel Julien stockholders sued the majority holder, who was also the president of the board. The plaintiffs in the case reportedly represented unnamed Chicago interests. After a few newspapers picked up on the juicy story, the lawsuit was suddenly dismissed, and those unnamed interests went on to buy out the board president's shares in the hotel. Were Al Capone and his associates the so-called Chicago interests? Is that how he wrangled control of the Red Brick Hotel along the Mississippi River? The 1927 timing is awfully coincidental, right in the middle of Capone's mob rule, but we may never know for sure. In 1932, Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for income tax evasion.
And at that point in time, Al never showed up anymore.
Capone served some of his sentence at Alcatraz, off the coast of San Francisco. The federal government released Capone from prison in 1939 amid failing health due to syphilis, which wasn't curable at that time. Capone lived for another 7 years, mostly at his mansion in Miami, Florida. It's unlikely that the gangster ever returned to the Hotel Julien, but the legend of his time as a hotel man in Iowa lingers.
That's probably something that happens a few times a month. Someone will say they read something about Al Capone or just the history of the hotel in itself, because there's a lot of history over the course of 100 plus years.
From the Hotel Julien in Dubuque, Iowa, I'm Kevin, across America.